Uh, Today we're honored to be in the presence of some words that are bandied about greatly in our society, mainly legend and icon. Those are two words that are thrown about greatly in our society. They always say, well, this person's a great legend or a great icon. We actually have one with us today, and his name is Parnelli Jones. Parnelli Jones is special for a variety of reasons, and he's been known as a race car driver. He's been known as someone that was an innovator. He's been known as a person that could do things that no one else could do. He's raced in virtually every type of venue under the sun. He came from more or less meager beginnings, but we don't know that. We're going to find that out today in our interview with America's legendary race car driver, innovator, and American hero, in our opinion, on the cutting edge, and that's with Parnelli Jones right here in Torrance, California. Now, Parnelli, a couple things that we need to know. You're born in Texarkana, Arkansas.
That's correct, yeah.
When did your family move to California?
I was about a year and a half, almost two, I guess, when they moved to, actually they went to Hemet, California, and then shortly after that to Fallbrook. And I was raised in Fallbrook until I was about 7 years old, in which time my dad worked in the avocado groves. And about that time, my parents moved to Torrance. And then I was raised in Torrance, California. I really, and still have my office here in Torrance, and I do live in Palos Verdes, but other than that, that's basically where
so you're a hometown kid right here from Torrance, California.
Yeah.
You're a real icon for Torrance. I mean,
Yeah.
they got to name some buildings after you or something soon.
Well, you know, the chief of police used to say his claim to fame was to catch me all the time.
That's incredible. One of the things I'm gonna move on to this, because one of the things is that and California is a kind of a special place, and you came out here when you were two. You by 7, so you're talking about 1940. About you moved to Torrance, is that right?
Yeah.
And in those days, they had Carroll Speedway, I called it. They had Gilmore Stadium. They had all these places where they were racing midgets, weren't they?
Yeah, Gilmore, they raced midgets. They run mostly stock cars and sprint cars and roadsters, track roadsters at Carroll Speedway.
One of the things that they had was a big controversy back in the midget days, was they had the Offenhausers versus the V8 60s,
Yeah.
which were 1932 Ford small block engines that they raced in those days. Now, when did you start getting interested in all these kind of car racing
you
things?
mentioned Carroll Speedway, because when I was a kid, I went out there and didn't have any money, so obviously I climbed over the fence and watched the first race there, and it was some sprint cars and track roadsters, and track roadsters were T model type, and
27,
anyway,
23 Ts.
yeah, and Troy Ruttman was driving one, and he was a big burly guy, and he stuck way out of the car, and he started in the back, and he came all the way up and wound up winning the race. And that somehow made a great impression on me. I didn't think at that particular time I was going to be a race driver or anything like that. But anyway, it made a great impression on me. And so later, when I did get involved in racing and stuff like that, I wanted to, he was my
Emulate
hero.
him.
Yeah, I wanted to be like him.
Yeah.
And one thing about racing, we didn't have driving schools and go-karts and things like that. It was kind of like going out and doing your racing was kind of like watching somebody dance and trying to go out and do the same thing they did.
One of the questions that, you've done a lot of these interviews, and one of them was about, was it your brother or cousin who got you involved in the process?
Yeah, actually my cousin, what happened was when I turned 16, I had a horse before this, and when I sold my horse when I was 16, and I bought a hot rod, and I paid $200 for the hot rod.
What was it?
It was a T Roadster, much like the ones that was running on the track, but it was street legal, somewhat. And anyway, I had to work in a garage in the afternoon after school to keep it running.
Sure.
And so because I was working in the garage, my cousin had took his wife's old car and made a jalopy out of it. Wanted to help him, thought I ought to help him because I had a little mechanical knowledge because I was absolutely hanging on washing parts in the garage.
Right.
Anyway, I did, and he used to let me warm it up, and that was
That's
a big.
that's one of the things that they haven't really touched on when we talk about this, and there was a lot of great drivers, really great drivers that came out of the jalopy racing circuit, and was that where you got your start?
Oh, no question. So, in doing that, my cousin, first of all, he didn't do very well with the car. And he blew the engine up. So my buddy and I, we went over and I was only 17 years old, but we bought it from him and got a junkyard engine and put in there, and we were going to take turns driving it. However, he never wound up getting in it. I didn't do very well either, and ran a few races. And at the time, only being 17, you had to be 21. So I had to have a phony identification. And my buddy, who was helping me, used to kid me about a girl in school. Her name was Nellie. And so he called me Parnelli after this gal,
Funny.
because my first name is Rufus. And so anyway, it stuck, and that's basically, because otherwise the kids in school would have known I wasn't 21
Right,
being in my
right,
backyard.
yeah. One of the things that everybody has in common when they get into this automotive industry is connections with
Yeah.
people that help them along the way.
Yeah.
One of them that seems to be a big mover in your history was J.C. Agajanian. Could you tell the people who J.C. Agajanian was and how he helped you?
Well, J.C. obviously was probably the promoter at Carroll Speedway when Troy Ruttman was running, but J.C. was a promoter of automobile racing. He also wanted to be a driver in his early day, but his dad threatened him more or less, and the only way he would help him is to, help him support a race car or stuff, but as long as he didn't drive it. But anyway, he became a major race car promoter all over the western part of the
Now,
United
is it
States.
true that he was actually a pig farmer and a trash hauler?
Well, his dad was.
Oh, I see.
His dad was came over here from the old country.
Armenia, yeah.
Yeah, and he was working as a dishwasher, and he noticed that they were throwing out this garbage out the back, so he bought a couple of pigs to feed and took the garbage and everything and grew that into a major pig farm, and also bought a lot of real estate way out in the valley, in Montclair area way out there. So.
Well, there's little doubt that J.C. Agajanian had an incredible impact on Southern California and on the car culture, because there were races at Gilmore Stadium, there were races at Carroll Speedway, there was constant competitive things going on. Now, how'd you get your first race?
What do you mean? Well,
I mean, after you're doing jalopies, I
Yeah.
understand that.
Well, I have to credit the jalopies for a lot. I mean, a lot of. First of all, when I went into other kinds of racing, they kind of give me a little down thinking about me or whatever, but because of the jalopies. But I want to tell you, we had as many as 200 cars show up to qualify.
Right.
They only took like 16 for the main event. Now,
So you
we
had to
didn't
be
have
really
200
good.
every weekend, but we had a tremendous amount of cars.
Well, there's
And,
little doubt that you've never been known as a non-competitor. You've
Well,
always been a big
It was
competitor.
kind of like roller derby. You push, shove, took everything you could take, and give it 110, 120%.
Right,
I mean,
right,
it was
right.
that sort of deal. Well, when I went into other kinds of racing, sprint cars and midgets,
Sure.
and got promoted on that, I didn't have that kind of competition. It hurt me in a lot of ways. It taught me how to go fast and maximize everything I could out of a car. What it did for me is it's kind of bred like a quarter horse and not a thoroughbred.
Yeah.
And I knew how to go fast. I didn't know how to win.
Oh, funny.
And, so I had a lot of races that I fell out that I should have won. And
One of the movies, there was a movie in 1949 that came out, was called The Big Wheel. Do you remember this,
Yeah,
with Mickey
yeah.
Rooney and Thomas
Yeah.
Mitchell?
Yeah.
And it was a lot about Carroll Speedway and about Indy and all
Yeah.
of that kind of stuff. Did you know about this?
Oh yeah, that was a little bit before my time. But,
Right.
But I knew all about that. So watched it. Saw
Right.
the movie.
So how did you when you went to race these guys from the Midwest on these sprint tracks and so on? I mean, there was a tremendous amount of competition between. You're a West Coast guy now.
Yeah.
You're not from Texas, you're from West Coast,
Yeah.
California guy, against these guys from the Midwest who are pretty darn competitive, aren't they?
No question. Well, one thing about it, California, most of the manufacturers for automobile race cars were done out here in California, and also, we could race all year long because of the weather. So it made it more popular, I guess, at the early stages. And anyway, that when I first went back east, and and my friend Jim Hurtubise went back the year before, and he talked me into coming back there in 1959, and I went back and ran in all these horse tracks and fair grounds and things, and dust and dirty. I mean, I almost quit because it was so dusty and dirty, and I couldn't, and I thought, man, if I have to race in this kind of stuff for the rest of my life, I'm not going to live very long. But anyway,
it's the old story where you got the fertilizer on your goggles.
well, when we'd get to a racetrack where I could see I could win, and I ran very well. I ran third in my first race back there, and won the second one, and won a few more.
Explain to people, because they don't really know I don't think many people really understand the difference between why sprint cars are a transition to Indy cars.
Yeah, sprint cars, actually, midgets were really kind of designed for a quarter-mile track.
Right, small
And the
ones.
sprint cars were kind of designed for a half-mile track.
Okay.
And Indy cars were designed for mile tracks and larger.
Right.
Now, they sometimes interchange them,
Right.
on tracks, I mean, obviously you're not going to take an Indy car and run it on a quarter-mile track.
Right.
But you could run it on a half-mile, and you could run a midget even all the way up on a mile track.
Right.
But anyway, when in 1960, I was talked to going back and running USAC, which I went back and won the Midwest Sprint Car Championship and won some races, and quite a few races. And then the following 2 years, 61 and 62, I won a national sprint car championship.
Now
That was probably the most dangerous part of my racing career, because we were running these high bank racetracks.
Oh yeah.
And a half mile, 5/8 miles, and one of them deals where you had to hold your breath for as long as you could. And
One of the things that I was going to ask you, though, I have to step in on this one because it's really important. How did you make money in those days? I mean, there were sponsors, but how did you earn a living?
well, they paid a lot of money, as far as I'm concerned. When
Did
you
they?
run up front, you've got, you've made some good money.
Really?
First of all, I set goals for myself. Even when I was running jalopies,
Yeah.
I set goals, and I was living at home and saving about $50 a week. So I always felt if I could make $1,000, I'd collect the interest on it, and I probably wouldn't have to work anymore. Then I finally won my first $10,000.
Wow.
And I thought I
What
was
year
in
was
heaven.
this? What was
Well,
your?
that was probably in late 50s, and
Wow, that's a lot of money in those days, huh?
yeah, 60. And then when I started running sprint cars back east in Indiana, and also went to Indy cars as well, and so I thought, man, I'd just make $100,000. I would never have to work again, But
Now, these sponsors, were these the car owners and developers, or
I
were
started
these?
driving for everybody else, because when I was running jalopies, and winning a lot of the races, well,
Sure.
I was invited into different types of racing, and I
see.
won right away.
Right.
So I just, people started saying, "Boy, you're Indy material."
Yeah, yeah.
I thought, well, and I waited a couple years before I went to Indy to make sure that I had a good ride when I got there, and I did ride. In my rookie year, I was rookie of the year and led the race for 27 laps at Indy, and could have won if my car hadn't lost a cylinder.
All right, we're going to get into that.
Okay.
That's a whole segment of this show we're going to do about Indy and a variety of other things that are involved in there. There's a couple of side issues I want to clear up though before we get there.
Okay.
And we kind of have to jump around a little bit because I think some of these events that happened to you in your life were either during Indy or shortly there in the middle of it or whatever. I'm not going to get too confused here. Number one was the Pikes Peak run. This was a very famous thing that happened during the 60s a lot, was the Pikes Peak run that would, you'd do these fast runs up the mountain there. So can you tell us, how did you get involved in Pikes Peak?
Well, first of all, most of my career, I was contracted with Firestone and also with Ford.
Okay.
And Ford wanted me to come out there and do that. And I'm the kind of guy that likes to see what's on the other side of the hill. That's probably why I've driven just about everything.
Right.
And I thought, well, maybe, and I love the mountains and everything. It just seemed like that was the thing I ought to go try.
Right.
And I went out there, and Bobby Unser helped me a great deal when I got there. And he and I became pretty good friends over the thing. And anyway, I didn't win the first year. I finished third in the stock car division for Ford.
Okay.
And but I liked it, and of course I knew that it was the most dangerous course I'd ever driven in my life. And
Really?
the first half of the race is in the trees, and then you leave the tree line,
Right.
and then it's straight off. And there's a couple of places if you went off, they wouldn't even need to go look for you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
that bad.
Yeah.
And but anyway, what I figured that I'm like everybody else. I run real hard down through in the trees and everything. When I got to the tree line, when there's no tree line, I made sure I got to the top. But
Right.
anyway, I come back the second year and won the next 2 years in a row.
But good guys went off the cliff there and a whole bunch of
Well,
things.
there's guys, but the amazing thing is up until just a couple of years ago, they didn't have, never had a driver fatality. Which
Wow.
shows you what respect, just like me, when
Yeah.
I got up there with a no tree line, I mean, you made sure you got to the top. If you
Right.
won, fine. If you didn't, fine, So it was, I think that you had a lot of respect.
So how many years did you run that?
Pikes Peak?
Yeah.
4 years.
4 years,
Yeah.
which were from what year to what year?
Well, it was, I think I won in 63 and 64.
Okay.
And I think my first year was 62,
Right.
and the last one will be 65.
Okay. Now, one more thing to clear up, as I call it, housekeeping things that are involved in this, and that is there was a thing called the mobile economy run, and this kind of it ended. I think they started in 34 or 5, and they ended in 69 or something. At any rate, or 68, one of those two. And I was just wondering, did you ever engage yourself in the mobile economy run?
No, that wasn't my bag. I mean, that takes a lot of patience and a lot of skill too, I would reckon, because they really had to feather the throttle, and they do a lot of things.
Right. Was that a tool for?
I think it was a great value, a tool for showing your product that kind of mileage and that sort of thing, because
Right.
it had a lot of competition, and it went clear across the United States. So
Interesting.
it was,
Okay, let's step right into your key ingredients here, which is Indy, and how it all this whole Indy issue is a big deal. I guess I don't know how many people have interviewed you about Indy, about 63 and your win there.
yeah.
But let's just say for those people who don't know, you had a history of braking machinery, of oil leaks, of my goodness and gracious, you couldn't get over how many things of mishappenstance happened to you. So can you now, in retrospect, I just want you to think back on this. Can you think back about all these things that happened to you, and were you starting to question yourself after a while?
Well, I think I brought that up earlier. I knew how to go fast. I didn't know how to go long enough because of my earlier training. That's what I've analyzed myself.
I see.
And, I've been started races where I just knew as a matter of me going and doing the race, I could win.
Yeah.
But instead, all of a sudden, I planned on doing that. Then when the race got underway, pretty soon I'd want to see if I could put a lap on them, And that's just that competitive thing about me.
Right.
I'm very competitive and had a lot of will and desire to win. But anyway, it hurt me in a lot of ways. And, my first year there, however, was not didn't have anything to do with that. I mean, I was leading the race, although because they said you had to get tire wear, and I qualified 5th. And I was running 4th in the race, early in the race, and Jim Rathman was leading, and Roger Ward was running 2nd, and Eddie Sachs was running 3rd, and I was running 4th behind him. And so we started I followed him a couple laps, taking it easy and everything else. And
This is what year? 62?
61.
61, okay.
And so anyway, going down the back straightaway, and Sachs pulls out to pass Roger. When he does, I'm in the draft, and they pulled me up real hard, so I just pulled out and passed them both. So now I'm in 2nd. I thought, well, boy, I better hustle the next 2 turns, to keep them from running over me. So And I did, and I caught Rathman coming off of the fourth turn, passed him within a half a lap. I passed all three of them.
Cool.
So then I thought, boy, you better back down, and take it easy, save the tires and all that.
Yeah.
So then I led it for 27 laps, and like I said, until I lost a cylinder in the engine, and pretty soon I lost two cylinders and came in. I wanted to finish in that year. I think I finished 12th,
Right.
but they come in and kept changing the plugs and going back out and then
Well,
do the
you-
same thing again.
Your victory in '63 is legendary. Again, the big controversy about the oil slick and the black flagging this and the track stewards and all the other
Yeah.
things that went into engaged in it. But the bottom line is you did win. Finally, after all the controversy was aside and that sort of thing, and it sort of made you this American icon, I call it, because there wasn't anybody in the country then that didn't know about Parnelli
Well,
Jones.
first of all, in 1962, I was the first to run 150 miles an hour.
That's the big
around
one,
there,
yeah.
and then I dominated that race until I lost the brakes.
Right.
Was absolutely long gone. Should have won that race hands down. Lost the
Right.
brakes. Made two pit stops without any brakes at all. And of course, they made a rule after that: if anybody known to not have brakes, would certainly couldn't run. So that.
I was gonna ask you, what's it like to be going 150 miles an hour and realizing you don't have any brakes?
Well, what happened when I first that first happened to me, it was very frightening, but you don't use the brakes a lot there.
Gears.
And so I was going around there and I thought, well, I'll just stay out here and I'm leading the race. You're getting $150 a lap for lap money. I said, I might as well stay out here until I have to pit. I wasn't planning on going back in.
Right.
So I thought, well, I'll just, back off, stay a little bit. I stayed out there, led the whole thing until I run the tire into the cord and figured that's it, So I started going, I slowed down as I went by the start finish line and started working my way around. They grabbed the car, hit the air jacks, put on three tires and pushed me out before I could tell them I don't know if I want to run anymore. But anyway, I had to make one more pit stop now. So
Right.
I thought if I stayed out of everybody, at least I had a chance to go out and think about it.
Yeah.
So I thought if I stayed out of everybody's way and just try to finish the race and everything else. Well, the next time I tried to go in a little bit faster and they had the tires laid out and I had to run over the tires to try to slow it down and I rubbed it up against the wall and they pulled it back and put four more tires on it and I finished the race. But
Now the car you were running then was that a Novi then?
no, that was an Offenhauser.
Okay.
Actually, the same car in my rookie year. I ran that car 4 years in
Right.
a row.
Right.
Ran it 61, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
And anyway, came back the next year and sat on the pole again and dominated the race. I mean, nobody could even touch me. And toward the end of the race, probably, I don't know, wasn't too long, maybe 15 laps or so from the end. All of a sudden, I went in the corner and the car went sideways and
Right.
and everything else. Well, the oil tank on the left-hand side had two mounts in the center of it, and one of them cracked up front. Just cracked, left a crack. So, and they're dry sump systems, so it was you fill them about 3/4 the way full to begin with. Well, once it dropped down below that level, I mean,
Right.
it was scary. So I was slowing down and got sideways and everything else. Finally, it got better and stopped, and only a puff of smoke had come out at the end of the straightaway. Well, I don't know in the pits what's going on, but my car owner, which is J.C. Agajanian, and Chapman, who is Jimmy Clark's car
Colin
owner, were
Chapman?
sitting there
Yeah.
arguing
Yeah.
whether they ought to black flag me or not.
Right.
And the only thing is, you better be sure that you make the right choice, because my car quit dropping oil. It did drop oil. And one thing about the Indianapolis race, if you run out of oil, you're done. You cannot add oil to your
Right.
car. That's just a
We've-
rule.
we've kinda studied
and
this-
there was two cars that day that run completely out of oil, and the track had been oily all day, all afternoon.
Right.
So,
Well, I was going to say that this is the best analogy that I think I can draw from your experience there on your Indy win was the immaculate reception of Franco Harris from Terry Bradshaw when he caught that pass, and they still argue about it today. about whether it was a legal play or not. And I think that this is one of those fantastic stories about motor racing that the people will be talking about 100 years from now about whether or not
Yeah, well, especially the Europeans because of Jimmy Clark.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, again, Chapman had no animosity. I mean, like I say, the next year, 64, 65, I drove for him,
Right.
And Jimmy and I got along great, and he didn't feel that. And one of the quickest laps that I ran all day was next to the last lap
Right.
in
Yeah.
the race.
You don't have to convince us. We're your fans. The bottom line is that there's a lot of competitors out there that we found that have had some trepidation about some of the things that you did, whether it was conventional racing or moving on to what we're going to discuss right now, which is all about the turbine car and modern day technology, about how you got involved with the turbine car. How did that happen?
Well, first of all, I was doing all the tire testing at Indianapolis for Firestone, and Andy Granatelli, who ran the Novice, wanted me to take a ride in the Novi. And I was always curious about them because they had such a tremendous amount of horsepower, but they were heavy and didn't have
Long wheelbase too.
long wheelbase. Anyway, I went out the very first time I got in the car. I went out and run quicker than anybody had ever ran in it, and it was easy to drive. I was really impressed with that. But
Right.
I would never drive the Novi because it had no reliability.
Right.
And I'm pretty much had a lot of mechanical knowledge and knew that they blew the engines up. They had only 3 main bearings in it and that sort of thing. But anyway,
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, and let me take a quick retrospect, quick back even to the '63 car and that car you had. How much development did you have? Input did you have on all these cars you drove?
well, actually, when the same car I drove for 4 years in a row, we modified that car every year.
Right.
We made it better every year. In fact, the oil tank that was leaking was also a nice aluminum tank. We used to be a steel tank, and that's probably one of the reasons maybe it cracked, because it was mounted the same way the steel tank was, and could have not being as strong.
Right.
Know. Anyway, we put the first air intake onto the engine from the outside in 1963, and made it better. And in 1964, we even modified it there, and also put an aluminum fuel tank, that whole tail section.
Right.
Made the whole car lighter and everything.
The reason why I brought that up, of course, is because we're talking about now we're going to move that back to this the turbine car, and so you evidently had some pretty strong input about what was going on with that car if you're going to get into it and drive it.
Well, I did after I made a decision to run the car. Basically, what happened was because Andy Granatelli and I started socializing a lot, because he kept hounding me to drive the Novi, and I wouldn't do that because of the reliability factor. And when he started building the turbine car, he called me up one day and he says, "Come over, I got something to show you." So I went over to Santa Monica and seen the car for the first time, and it was pretty far along at the time. And I said, "I'm testing my own car over in Phoenix in about a month," and I said, "Bring that car over here, and I'll take a ride in it." So he did, and he brought it over there. And the more I drove it, I got better. I thought, this is kind of different. It had a 3-second throttle delay time.
So that means let me clear this up for the people that are watching. 3 seconds, you push on the accelerator, and 3 seconds later, 1,
Yeah.
2, 3, it'll catch.
Well, you
And
can
then when
tell-
you get off of it,
Yeah.
you get off the
Well,
gas, and it's
when
3
you
seconds.
get off of it, it's like the throttle stuck.
Oh my
So
God.
you really have to use the brakes to slow it down.
Right.
And, but knowing you didn't use the brakes at Indy, for
Right.
one thing, and me, I have the knowledge.
Does this have a gear shift or
No.
No.
Just
Direct drive.
direct drive, yeah.
So it's the only one.
Yeah, well, it didn't need a transmission.
No transmission.
Just, it had 550 horsepower.
Right.
Which wasn't a lot,
No.
but it had a lot of torque. And, but anyway, because it didn't have any deacceleration when you backed off, it was like the throttle was stuck.
Right.
I helped them build that rear flap on it. That
I see.
would pop up when, and the reason for that, about 70% of the braking is on the front wheels,
Right.
and you only have about 30% on the rear. So having that flap connected to the rear brakes to hold the rear
Air
brakes
brakes
down,
for
to give
all
it,
intents and
to
purposes,
give it,
right?
well, to give it more downforce on
Yeah,
the rear.
yeah.
If you had to use the brakes hard, because if you happen to lose, you have double cylinders and you have a different system for the back
Yeah.
and the front. So I figured that way you had something that might keep you out of the wall.
Right.
Anyway, so that was the idea for that, and that was my idea, so to speak. Anyway,
What about the tires? That was a big deal. The tires were.
well, the tires, first of all, we're running four rear wheel tires. I mean, naturally the regular two-wheel drive cars have smaller front tires.
Right.
We're running four tires, but the car, anyway, when I was running over to Phoenix, more and more I ran it, you can now guess the 3-second throttle time somewhat, pretty
Sure.
much. And,
Unless
anyway-
somebody gets in front of you.
huh?
Unless somebody gets in front of you.
So anyway, now I went back and Andy sounded me to drive it for Indy. And I'm not real happy with my own car. And so, anyway, Andy says, come on, you gotta drive the car, blah, blah, blah. And I think, well, there's gotta be, money has to be a decider. So I asked myself, would you do it for 25,000? I said, no. I said, would you do it for 50,000? I said, no. I said, would you do it for 100,000? Yeah, I thought for 100,000, maybe I would drive it,
And we're talking about now $100,000 for you to drive this car. And you put a price on it. Now what do you do?
Well, I mean, when I did that, I told Andy, and Andy agreed to pay it. And of course, he made me, he wouldn't pay me until I qualified the car. Anyway, he paid me, and of course, that'd be like asking for $1 million today.
Sure.
To drive one race.
Yeah, right. Right.
But anyway, I didn't know the car was going to be as good as it did. However, in the 7 years that I rented Indianapolis, I had my worst starting spot. I started second row outside, which is sixth fastest. I was
Right.
always in the first five before that.
Right.
And but anyway, during the month of May, I had a lot of fun with the car because during practice, this thing would accelerate. Ran really good to the car, handled like a dream.
Right.
Handled with the four-wheel drive was great. It didn't right off the bat, but we changed the gearing and setup and everything and worked it out, and it really handled well.
Now let's set the stage here. This is for all intents purposes, an out of the box Pratt and Whitney.
PT6 helicopter engine.
It's a helicopter engine. It weighs about 135 pounds, right? It's very light.
I think it was no. I think the engine weighed a little more than that.
Okay.
I don't remember.
Maybe 180, something like that, something incredibly light.
No, I think it's 200 and something.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it weighs a couple hundred pounds.
But it was lighter than a regular combustion chamber.
That's what I was going to say. And here and how about the weight of the car? How did
Well,
your
I'd say the weight of the car was pretty much the same because you got two
Four-wheel
got a rear
drive.
end and a front end.
Yeah.
And so also bigger tires on the front too. But,
was the engineering tough to engineer a four-wheel drive car?
well, they didn't. They had Ferguson Company because some of the later Novis were four-wheel drive.
Okay.
So he was into the four-wheel drive thing before the turbine thing.
I mean, it hasn't been long that Porsche just came out with a four-wheel drive car. Huh?
Well, anyway, so during the month of May, this thing would accelerate across the short straightaways and out onto the long straightaways, but about halfway down the straightaway, it would quit accelerating. Now,
Okay.
you could put a higher gear ratio in it and make it accelerate all the way down the straightaway, but you would run much slower in lapse time. So you pick the best gearing and for that particular situation.
Right.
And so anyway, during practice, about halfway down, Mario and Foyt and a lot of the top guy, Gurney and all of them, they'd drive by me and they assumed that I was backing off.
Right.
So they started saying, well, he's sandbagging, he's backing off, he's sandbagging. I wasn't sandbagging, I had no reason to sandbag. But anyway, the press picked it
Dan
up.
Gurney really believes you did.
Yeah, well, the press picked it up, obviously. And they made a big deal out of it, and people were sending me sandbags in the mail and stuff like that. So I had a lot of fun with it because I knew race day when they put on, because we carried 75 gallons of fuel in.
Okay.
And I knew race day when they guys, McGurney and Foyt and Randretti and all the unsers all put that 75 gallons of fuel in and took the 10 or 15% nitro that they were running in their methanol
Right.
to get more power,
Right.
they probably wouldn't have enough to get back by me. And basically that's what happened. But what happened before the race started, knowing this in my mind that they probably wouldn't be able to get back by me, I kept kidding them and saying, because I'm having fun with this, and I kept saying, well, you know, tell me how fast you guys are going to run in a race because I want to know where to set that screw. Because you know, feeding the thing more
A little
fuel.
gamesmanship
Yeah.
never hurt, did it?
Yeah.
No.
So, anyway, I had a lot of fun with it, and so when they dropped the green flag, Gordon Johncock was starting outside front row, and Mario was on the pole. And when we went in the first corner, I stuck it up in the gray because of the car, like I said, handled great, and I drove around all of them except for Mario, and I caught him perfectly timed in turn two. And I came underneath him and passed him, and less than a half a lap, I was leading the race.
Beautiful.
And just dominated the whole race.
Now that's a question that never has been answered that we know about, but we need to know your answer now. How many pit stops did you make in that 67 race?
I think 3.
3. And how much did everybody else have to stop?
Same. 3, same.
So your
We didn't get
gas mileage was very similar to the
Yeah,
same?
oh yeah, yeah.
So it was the same as what they were
That
running?
part was pretty much the same. What the biggest problem that I mentioned before is
Yeah.
I didn't know how to win. I mean, if I had have just halfway taken it easy out of the pits,
Yes.
just halfway taking it easy instead of seeing how quick I can get it going, you know,
Yeah.
because all that torque at the bottom,
Right.
you know, was just killing the gears in it. And
I see.
basically, that's what happened. I mean, that's.
So
you
what
know,
broke?
Pardon me?
What broke?
Well, the quick change gears in the rear end have bearings in to hold the quick change gears.
Yes.
And one of those bearings let go, and it's all from the torque.
I see.
You know, of course, we got rained out after 18 laps, and we had to run a few extra laps. And,
Right.
And I was only 3.5 laps from the end when I quit. So I
So
had
you're telling
almost
me-
a lap lead. Foyt was right in front of me. He wound up winning the race.
You were
I was
less than
ready.
10 miles from the finish.
Yeah.
And you still finished 6th, didn't you?
Well, the reason I finished 6th was on the last, right on the last lap, close to the last lap, they had a big pile up on the front straightaway, and that kind of ended the race.
I see.
that-
Otherwise, you would have been way
otherwise
back.
I'd probably been farther back.
Yeah. All right. Now let's move to that. You know, this is so important because in '68, did you tell you know?
You 67?
Yeah, I mean, you know,
68, yeah.
'67. That was that race. Okay. '68 comes along, and the STP Special is coming back, but this time with a 1,000 horsepower, right? With a bigger engine and all that other jazz.
Well, that's not true,
Okay.
because what happened is the United States Auto Club put a restriction on the engine, on the air intake size.
I see.
However, Andy Granatelli, with Firestone's money, had Chapman build 4 Lotuses, turbine cars, but these were rear engine cars rather than the one I drove, which was on the side.
Right.
And so they showed up there, and I knew before the race that you know, these cars were going to be quicker than the old car.
Right.
And so, and of course, Andy kind of wanted to run the old car, and I knew that the new car I didn't think was safe, and it was too fragile because I'm not an educated engineer, but I'm a practical engineer because I've done it with trial and error. But the upper ears that hold the front end
Yeah.
were very thin, and when you have a 4-wheel drive car on the front end,
A lot of
you're
torque.
torquing it this way and
Yeah.
you're torquing it that way.
Yeah. Right.
And I felt that's what broke on
Improper
Spence's
in-
car,
yeah.
and Spence got killed in one of them in practice.
Right.
And Andy, I knew that if I was going to have to run, I was going to have to run one of those cars. And again, I didn't think it was safe, and I was thinking, well, maybe this is time to say goodbye. And So I made a decision to quit racing, open cockpit cars. I never retired. I haven't never retired even today.
Sure.
Not that I am, I'm probably done, but anyway, I stuck to to closed cockpit cars like the Trans Am series and stock cars and off-road, the Baja race and stuff like that.
Now, let's verge in on this. Why those turbine cars were banned from further use?
Well, I think they were banned for good reason, in my opinion, because you took so much away from the hot rod industry, and and you have a racing fraternity, and why would you want to outlaw yourself out of business and bring in all the white collar people from Pratt Whitney and Rolls Royce and other
GE, yeah.
Yeah, why would you want to do that? And if it was practical for them to have passenger cars with that engine and stuff, would be a little different story. But
Well, but that's one of the things we did a little research on this, and Dodge had that Polara or whatever it was in '62 that
sure,
drove all the way
Ford
across.
tried it with a big truck and everything else. So.
Yeah, but Dodge actually drove a passenger car all the way across the country and
Yeah.
without incident.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrone with the engine. It's just that here you get back to the throttle delay time, the acceleration, none at all, and the consumption of fuel it has. So the thing at idle uses almost as much as it does with full power.
Right.
So, but anyway, I just don't think they were fitted. And if they were fitted for cars, you'd see them in cars now.
All right.
I mean, racing's a lot different than cars. However, in racing, aerodynamics has played a great part in the car industry,
Right.
as well as the first rear view mirror, for that goes.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot of things that what we've kind of come up with out of this whole thing is that you had a viable car in '67. You had a real viable car.
Yeah.
And you're saying that and even in '68, if they'd re-engineered the front end on it and made it a safe car, wasn't Joe Leonard killed in one or someone?
No.
Spence, okay.
Yeah, Spence was killed in one.
I see.
Practice in Indy.
I see.
Joe Leonard wound up driving the car that I was supposed to drive.
And how did?
Joe Leonard was our driver, Val, my partner, and I.
Okay.
His driver, and we loaned him because I made a decision not to do it. We loaned him our driver to run that car.
And how did he come
Joe,
out?
well, I did all the chassis setups, and Joe sat on the pole, was the fastest qualifier, and was leading the race with 12 or so laps to go. Andy Granatelli made a deal with Standard Oil to run gasoline instead of the jet fuel.
Instead of
gasoline
JP4.
didn't have enough lubricant in it and froze up the fuel pump drive on the yellow flag, and it wouldn't take off when they dropped the green flag.
What a wild story this whole American auto industry is, isn't it?
Well, I have that car in my collection, and the reason I do is because Firestone, who had financed the deal, wanted to run the car the rest of the year at all the other circuits and
Sure.
everything else, and they needed me to go along and do the chassis setups, and so with that, Andy gave me the car, and of course I took his son as a mechanic, chief mechanic with it, Vince Granatelli, and Vince and I became very close and worked well together and everything else, and we went out and scared him everywhere we went and never
I'll
won a
bet you.
race.
I'll bet you.
Never won a race.
I'll bet you. I'll bet you. Anyway, this is unbelievable. This is incredible stuff. Let's jump up here now to something that I mean, you know this business better than anybody. We're in the middle of an economic meltdown. We're in the middle of we've got all the major car companies going out of business. We're else facing serious problems. Let's take a little bit of your common sense engineering and put it into what's going on right now in our society.
Well, I hate to get into politics, but I mean, I certainly have some strong opinions.
Do you?
Yeah, and
We're ready.
well, first of all, not only we've been, everybody keeps saying, well, all we have to do is get the confidence back of the people. But we've been promoting down. We've been promoting all the way from our president down we've been promoting even how bad things are and how they're gonna get worse and
Sure.
so on and so forth. Instead of, we ought to be saying, let's get some tax breaks, let's get some going, let's get the stimulus package, let's put all the money to making jobs. Let's, people would come out of the woodworks to support that.
Right.
You can't, we're still, even today, we're talking about gloom and gloom. As long as you're talking gloom and gloom, we're never gonna get anywhere. And I don't know if the liberals in this country are trying to take us down to be a socialist or whatever. But,
Well, what do you
there ought to be three parties. There ought to be a Democratic Party, a Liberal Party, and a Republican Party.
Well, one of the things that when you talk about that is that here are the car companies coming hat in hand to Congress for this bailout money. What do you think of that?
Well, first of all, I'm not familiar with that. I mean, obviously, that's okay. I mean, if first of all, the unions have taken us down. I mean, the car companies for the years have put everything on the back burner. Well, with unions on that, so next we'll put it down the road, and this executive votes himself a big salary, he retires and goes on and so on. And finally, somebody had to pay the fiddler, and I think that's what we've come to in a lot of cases. And I think the only fix is we got to give. I mean, take the state of California. Schwarzenegger said he was going to promote jobs to stay here and all that thing. Well, he's running jobs out of this good state. I mean, running them into Mexico. We're running them out of everywhere. We got half the custom wheel companies that all went to China get their wheels made. I mean, we don't. To me, that's not good leadership. Period. I mean, I think Bush did a lot of great things, but there may be some of the things that he didn't step up to the plate. But obviously, it isn't just the president; it's the Congress that have to make those decisions. And we're too diplomatic in this country, and we need to step up to the plate and start doing something that's going to make this country better.
Here we go, Larry.
Parnelli, we heard from the CEO of GM admitting he made a mistake not following up with the EV vehicle. He also said that he didn't put enough resources in the hybrid. What's your thought about those technologies for the industry today with the concern we have about imported oil?
Well, that's probably partially true too. They have to put it on the bottom line. I mean, nobody's perfect. I mean, that's probably true. I think Toyota got a head start with the Prius, and we're making. I mean, our products in this country are very, very good right now, but we're living on a past. I mean, people's not saying American cars are not that good, but that's BS. They're very, very good now, and we need to. I mean, we just need to. All we need to do is turn the people around and start preaching some good things instead of gloom and gloom.
Well, are there some technological breakthroughs ahead in the automobile industry? The reason why I say that is I've been touting for the last couple of years a nano turbo turbine car. Now that was unthinkable, several years ago, but now it could be possible.
Well, I guess there's a lot of things. Technology, I mean, with all the computers and things that they can do today,
Right.
It's way beyond me. I'm not into hybrids. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think that they're a thing coming, and all that. But, I'm probably not the guy to ask for those questions. But I just think that we need to really, really start preaching how good we really are and not how bad we are.
Parnelli, one of the things that we were researching to prepare for today was the turbine engine. And because you drove that vehicle and you had it for the month of May or whatever it was, we read where they drove one of those those Chrysler vehicles from Central Park in New York to California out in Torrance perhaps in 4.5 days.
Yeah.
No problems with it. Ran in temperatures from 17 below to 70 degrees coming through Arizona, getting about 17 miles a gallon. So they said it wasn't as good, as a conventional, piston-driven car, but it's got 20% less parts. You could put kerosene in to get, jet fuel.
Yeah, you can run it on anything, really.
And we read that, Chrysler they were dealing with a NOx problem. the
The what?
nitrous oxide.
Yeah,
And because of the smog in LA, that was a big deterrent to stopping that development. But at one time, the head engineer of Chrysler felt that they did have an answer. They were going to fix the 77 LeBaron, and they did have a car that would meet that criteria. But because Chrysler was in trouble, going close to bankruptcy then, and was federal funded, there might have been a deal made saying, leave it alone, let's stay with the piston engine because of the amount of jobs that would be connected, like you said earlier, with hot rods.
Because it's aftermarket. Everybody knows, I mean, the aftermarket thing here in America has been, since the days of the muscle car, have been phenomenal. I mean, people have been making money all over this country with aftermarket products that are, performance products and even non-performance products, just to look at. So, I mean, these are big, giant macro issues facing our country right now about whether to, I mean, my argument was, and always has been, I don't care whether they have a Volkswagen or not. Not everybody's going to want one, but somebody might. And the same thing goes with the turbine car. I can't imagine why GM or other companies never made one, just to offer it and then to keep it going.
well, I think maybe it, obviously has too many problems. I mean, I think you brought up a good point in the smog deal. I mean, this thing could be very pollutant, and that you're going to run some kind of fuel in it. So, it's hard to say, but I'm sure that we have a lot of great engineers in this country, and if it was pliable, I think it would happen. And I think there's just probably so many better ways to go than that.
I got to ask you one question that has nothing to do with what we're just talking about. It's just one thing that just came into my mind that was a very important thing about your off-road racing career. And one of the things was that I remember vividly, I was a lot younger then, and you were, I think it was a 75 or something like that. You were running across Baja in a big race and just ran dead into the stop at, I don't know what speed it was, but it was some sort of a crash that you had. Do you remember that?
Which time?
No. Maybe that one, I don't know.
Yeah.
But can you tell us about that?
Well, I actually, I won the 500 and laid it on its side 3 times.
Did you?
I actually rolled it in a ball the last time, still won the race. But I wasn't a very good off-road driver because you had to run a little less than 100%. And if I hadn't had Bill Straub riding with me, because he'd beat me on the leg and tell me to slow down and
Right.
said, we don't want to be out here, there's coyotes and snakes and all that stuff. We don't want to spend the night out here. So that would help, but I actually had an accident with a motorcycle down there.
It was worse, yeah.
Yeah, well, what happened, I was following this dune buggy, and I kept running up behind him and falling back in the dust and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, a motorcycle come out of nowhere, hit him dead center, killed him, and
Oh,
burned my
God.
face and everything over the singed, And,
What happened now? Do this again.
well, there was a motorcycle. What happened was these guys were riding up and down the course,
Right.
the race course, while the race was going on.
Okay.
And what happened is they whipped up on the bank, and as soon as the dune buggy passed, one of them jumped right back in the road.
And you were
Yeah,
there.
well, then I was there. I mean, I didn't.
Oh, no.
I mean, it was all over.
Oh, my God.
But that's probably the worst thing that's ever happened to me in the Baja race. But
How
other
long
than
were you
that-
laid up on that
Huh?
one? How long were you laid up on that one?
well, I wasn't. I mean, not long at all. I mean,
Okay.
it was obviously their fault total. We did get sued, but it was one of the guy happened to be a vice president of a bank in San Diego.
Wow.
But him and his buddy were down there drinking, and people were telling them, get off the course, get off, and they were giving them the finger.
What do you think? I know you're pretty conservative here, but what do you think of the environmental groups that don't like off-road racing down in the desert and stuff? Did you?
Well, here's the problem is if you want to build something next door or whatever, there's always somebody that don't like it. For something, we've reached a saturation where, you do have that. and you have all these Greenpeace guys. I mean, maybe a lot of cases they're right, in a lot of cases maybe they're not right. But you can't house everybody up. I mean, we got these sand dunes that you can't hurt them down there in Southern California, you know, and there's places out in the desert you can't hurt them. I mean, people will never see it,
Right.
you know, as long as you're not, you know, killing some, you know, specimen or something, but species or something. But anyway, I don't know. I mean, people tend to complain about everything, you know. We need to pat ourselves on the back and say how good we can be for a while.
One of those are all these are of all the racing that you've done. Now you've done midgets and sprint cars and Indy cars and off road and motorcycle and everything else. What do you have one that you prefer to be in? If you had to jump in that car right or that vehicle right now, what would
Well,
it be?
first of all, I'd probably choose one with a roll cage over my head.
Tell us about the, if you will, the Saline Grabber Orange Mustang.
That's what we want to do. Yeah.
Take us there.
Well, first of all, you know, I won the Trans Am Championship for Ford in 1970 with the Boss 302, which is a 5-liter, and
Now, I'm sorry to interrupt again. There's a Trans Am and then there's Can Am. Can you explain the difference between those two races? Or
well,
those
Trans Am was you know, American-made sedans,
Okay.
and foreign-made sedans for that matter.
All right.
And Can-Am was specially high-performance sports cars, which were custom bodies and high-powered engines and all that stuff.
So that's totally different.
Totally different. They were a sports car, much power, a lot of power.
Okay.
Anyway, the Trans Am car, they were probably 500 horsepower.
Okay.
And anyway, in winning the championship in 1970, I've always had a fondness for the 70 Mustang. So I went and found one, I bought one, and started restoring it. And in driving it, you forget how antiquated things are. Nothing wrong with it. I mean, just you used to driving new cars, and
Yeah.
you get into something like that, and you think, gee, this may not be that much fun to get it when I finish it, to get it, you know, to drive it. So I had driven for Steve Saline in a couple of races, so I went down to Irvine and met with Steve, and I says, Steve, how about building me a Saline Mustang and paint it like my Trans Am car, because I have to go to some events and stuff. It'd be nice to have something like that to drive to the events. And so he said, yeah, that's a great idea. He said, maybe we could change this, we could do this and that. And I said, well, if you want to do that, we can do this and everything else. And he said, I think we could sell these things. So he decided to put a number on it and to build 500.
Okay.
So they're all numbered and everything else, signed by Steve and I, and they built 500 of them
What year was this?
in 07.
Okay.
And we sold them all, and I wanted to
You sold all of them.
We sold them all like that. Yeah, they were really good. And in fact,
None left.
In fact, we changed the suspension, put it like on my race car,
Yeah.
had on it, and we found out it outhandled the Saline cars, so
Wow.
his own cars. So now they've obviously changed that suspension toward the other Saline.
Did you get to
cars.
keep one?
Yes, I did.
We were down at the factory in Irvine, Ron, and I think we saw one of your cars there.
Yeah, I have one here. In fact, I have my 70 here as well. So
Now tell us about that. Tell us about when you were around. One of the biggest other driver controversies around was Donnie Allison versus Cale Yarborough. Now you knew both of those guys, didn't you?
yes, I did.
Well, so tell us about. Was that real or was that Memorex? What was
Well,
that?
they crashed at the end of the 500-mile race on
Yeah.
the last lap.
Yeah, Daytona.
You know, and that just goes to show you what desire is. I mean, both of them had a tremendous desire to not let the other one win.
Yeah.
So they were banging doors down the back straightaway, and when they got into 3, they crashed. And of course, they got out and started having some fisticuffs. And of course, that was pretty entertaining for NASCAR at the time.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you that. Did you yourself ever involve yourself in any altercations after the?
Fisticuffs.
Yeah. Well, I did have a thing with Eddie Sachs after I won. You know.
No, I didn't know that.
Well, the next day they had a luncheon, and I went over to luncheon, and it was Autolite luncheon, and Sack says, "I want to congratulate you for winning the race." He says, "Well, you should have been black flagged." I says, "Eddie," I says, "the track was oily all day long." I says, "2 other cars lost the oils completely. Don't
Yeah.
blame it all on me."
Yeah.
And he said, "No," he says, "I spun in your oil." And I says, "You know, right before he spun the car." And I said, "I think you spun the car." And they pushed him off, and a few laps later, he lost a wheel. And I think his wheel was loose, which has caused him to spin. And I said, "I think you lose. You know, your wheel was loose, probably why you spun." And he said, "No, I spun in your oil." I said, "You're full of it." And he says,
It
"You're
escalated.
full of it." And we started an argument. And I said, "I ought to punch you in the mouth." And he says, "Go ahead," and I let him have it. So, and he went up to the room. The funny part, he went up to the room. He had blood streaking down his deal and had a black flag in his hand and called the press, and so they took a picture of it.
So you're
But
it
we
was
were
a-
later friends before this.
Listen, we've taken too much of your time. You got one last quick question?
I would wonder if you could bring us upstairs so we can just maybe shoot some of the cars.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, we just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to have you kick the doors and tires on this issue and all these issues, and our country's facing a big thing, but we want you to know that you're still the American legend. You're still the American icon.
Thank you.
And we are so grateful for you participating in the whole American experience. It's when you look under American, you're going to find your picture, and we appreciate that so much. And
Thank you.
and we'll look forward to having our other people that are watching the Cutting Edge watch you too. And thanks so much, Parnelli Jones, Torrance, California, local California guy. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, the idea, I mean, we need to, and it's difficult today because technology in racing has hurt racing. That makes sense. You've gotten so far away from the mechanical end of it,
Right.
the guy working. I mean, now you got engineers in the car and everything else. They don't even ask the driver what he's doing anymore. Hardly, they come in and just, that's.
I remember being in a garage changing rear ends depending on a 1/4 mile track or an 8 mile track and all that.
Yeah, and it's taken away, and then one of the reasons, because, again, Formula One had $100 million budgets, but their racing was very poor. And if you stop and think about it, just take the word traction control, for example, which we all have now in our passenger car, which is great. But traction control in a race car, especially on a road circuit, the race driver, half of his talent is driving it with his foot as well as the steering. So he doesn't get any wheel spin, he doesn't make any mistakes.